Thank you very much. Thank you for coming along to probably the most niche talk at this conference. My name is Chris Neugebauer, and I have contact details, including my Twitter handle, on this slide. Slight puzzle for you to try and figure out what my Twitter handle is, but it's definitely there. Hi everyone. I am somewhat of a serial volunteer conference organizer over in Australia. This year, I'm the lead organizer of Linuxconf.au, which is one of the better open source conferences in the South Pacific region. It runs in Australia and New Zealand each January or February. I'm running it in my home city of Hobart at the moment. The web address for it is linux.conf.au if you want to find out more about it, or you can grab one of my cards from up the front later on if you're interested in making a trip out to Australia in January, which I highly recommend, even if it is slightly expensive. Before that, most of my experience in running conferences came from running the Australian Pikeon, which I did as lead organizer in 2012 and 2013, and have been involved with basically every year ever since, because I can't defend that, unfortunately. But anyway, I've been involved in running conferences for a while, have some opinions on running them, and I'm going to be talking today a bit about the software that you would use to back a conference. Here is the obligatory slide about running a conference. It's really good for you. You'll enjoy it. It's great on your resume. Most people who are in tech, who run tech conferences, think writing software is a fun thing, and so when they come and run a conference, they think, I know I'm going to go and write some software because I am good at writing software. That's not necessarily a very good idea. Even if your main interest is in tech, writing software is not a thing that you should plan to be doing. You should never plan to have time for it because you're a volunteer, you have a limited amount of time, and pretty much everything that happens in a conference is going to happen on the critical path. Your volunteers, yourself, you have better things to do than fixing bugs that are preventing people from buying tickets or preventing people from submitting their proposals and stuff like that. Even if you yourself think that you can write software well, you do not have the time to do it. So let's start by looking at what it takes to run a conference with the absolute bare minimum set of software that you can get away with. So if you're running a conference, there's basically two things that you need to do that face the public. Pretty much everything else is optional. The first is to get submissions for talks, and that means that you'll have people who speak at your event. Having speakers is a really good thing at a conference. And the second is to sell tickets. Selling tickets means you'll have people who attend your conference, which means that your speakers will have an audience, otherwise they will be speaking to empty rooms. Beyond that, pretty much everything else is optional to some extent. You might want to show the talks on a schedule, you might want to publish other content, like telling people where the venue is and stuff like that. Basically optional. Still kind of important, but I'm going to focus on the first two things, which is getting talks and selling tickets. So as far as accepting talk submissions goes, Google Forms is a veritable paragon of adequacy. In that you can use Google Forms to write a form, you can structure it exactly how you want, you can ask exactly the questions you want, get exactly the information that you want, as long as you are happy for your data to end up in a spreadsheet. That's probably sufficient for things that get a small number of talks for relatively small events. The great thing about getting your data into a spreadsheet is that you can, in fact, go and massage it into basically any format you want. Python has really, really good CSV support built into the standard library. So you can use that to, take the piles of data that you get in Forms and spit out something more readable, such as nicely formatted HTML pages, stuff like that. But you still get everything in a spreadsheet, which is, is probably fine if you're dealing with not that many people. There's also plenty of software as a service ticket sales things out there. You're probably familiar with Eventbrite. Tito is an alternative that can be cheaper in certain circumstances. And actual conferences, including this one here, have run successfully on this exact setup. PyDX uses Google Forms for the CFP, and it uses Tito for ticket sales. They've done nothing in terms of running their own software. If you're just a small event and you're trying to get started, there's not really any reason to go looking for bigger solutions that are tailored towards bigger events. So if conferences can successfully run on Google Forms, Eventbrite, and a static HTML website, why would you want to do anything that's different at all? Where can you go and improve upon things? And so the thing that you need to do, firstly, before you go and deploy any software at all, is understand exactly why it is that the current solutions do not meet your needs. In my experience, there's a few reasons why this might be the case. And a guiding principle for this is that writing software is not the core business of a conference. So if you're wasting time doing manual, repetitive work, then maybe it's time to go looking for alternatives. Time wasted doing stuff that could be automated is time spent not making your conference better. But that said, writing software itself is a manual activity that distracts from your core business of actually running events. So let's consider why this basic approach might not work. So talking about Google Forms, you get everything in a spreadsheet. And generally, spreadsheets do not scale as a way of storing data and do not store, and Google Forms don't tend to scale well as a way of repetitively entering information. LinuxConf AU this year had 460 proposals, which is quite a large amount, and reading that in a spreadsheet would be quite difficult. On top of that, we had 20 different reviewers who needed to provide feedback, provide scores on those. Presenting that sort of work in a spreadsheet and using a spreadsheet-based workflow, completely not viable. And then there's also the task of going and publishing a schedule. Google Forms doesn't give you an obvious way to do that. Generating basic HTML is an option, but when you have 80 to 100 presentations that you need to publish, then you need to make a schedule and put talk titles in that. You need to make talk description pages. There's a lot of copy and pasting going on to get all that information into the one place. So doing CFPs with spreadsheets doesn't really scale beyond a relatively small number of proposals, and generally a relatively high ratio of submissions to accepted proposals. On the ticket sales side of things, in terms of functionality, the out-of-the-box things are generally pretty good. My main argument against them is that they're expensive. If you're using Eventbrite, the fee is close to double the cost of using just a basic payment processor such as Stripe. Tito is marginally cheaper once you start dealing with volumes, but generally the cost savings from using just a simple payment provider in our case is probably enough to give financial assistance to another speaker, for example. So we can pay for somebody's travel if we chose not to use something like Eventbrite, which is, when you're dealing on a limited budget, is a serious consideration to have. And with events that are larger, that have complicated structures, linux.conf.au, for example, has a speaker's dinner. It has a dinner for everybody who wants to come along to one, that people might want to bring partners to. People might want to have one t-shirt, or they might want to buy extras. Few of the software as a service ticketing options have answers for this at all. They're generally good at dealing with simple things where you basically only really want to attend. Eventbrite has solutions for this, but I haven't seen anything that gives you a really coherent way of dealing with the things that are secondary to your event, like the dinners, like t-shirts and stuff like that. And then there's also an inevitable amount of manual work that comes from decoupling your CFP from your ticket sales. So for example, most conferences have free tickets for speakers. So if you have free tickets for speakers, then you need to somehow get your free ticket to your speakers. If your ticket sales system is completely separate from your call for paper system, then you somehow need to, tell the ticket system that these people are speakers. You either do that by doing voucher codes or by having your organizers register your speakers themselves. Generally, manual work that doesn't really need to be there. So once you outgrow these generic offerings, you should actually go and look at stuff that solves the problems that you might actually have. So it turns out, even though I say this is not the core business of conferences, that conferences shouldn't go writing their own software, enough of them do, and enough of them are open source that you can actually go out and use the software that other conferences have written for solving their problems, and at least make some of your work easier, so give you a base platform from which to modify stuff, rather than going and writing stuff from scratch. So the tasks of conference management software tend to look basically like the core business aspects of running a conference. That makes sense, I guess. You have tasks like call for papers stuff, which is taking your proposals from speakers, reviewing your proposals, publishing them, putting them on a schedule, and then other things include selling tickets, your registration stuff, and as a bonus, actually possibly having a way of publishing information that is not related to tickets or CFP, so having a free-form CMS of some description. The first piece of software that I want to point out is one called Zookeeper. Zookeeper was written for LinuxConf EU starting in about 2007 and organically grew to about 2013. It ended up being used over the course of 10 LinuxConf EU conferences and eventually by 5 instances of Pikeon Australia. It's generally pretty good at running conferences that look like LinuxConf EU as long as you don't run into difficulties in the organization process. It was conference-driven development, so as conferences actually needed stuff, they added the features in. It's reliable in the general case until you start dealing with issues that previous conference organizers hadn't experienced. In which case you're on your own. Other reasons why you would not really want to use it: it has a reputation for not being terribly easy to deploy. The ticket sales stuff in particular was not really good at handling edge cases. Pikeon AU this year sold out, and it made it really, really difficult to handle the wait list. There was a lot of difficulty with that. And finally, it hasn't really been that well maintained over the last 3 to 4 years. And this year, both of its primary users are going to stop using the software. LCA stopped using it this year, and Pikeon EU will probably be not using it next year. The alternative that I want to look at, though, is called Symposium. Symposium's grown out of the Python conference world. It was first used in the early iterations of DjangoCon US, and it was also used by Pikeon US from about 2012. It was actually commissioned by the PSF and written commercially, and it's still actively maintained, in particular by those people who originally wrote it at Eldarion, but it has enough of a community around it that it has support from the community to actually help you learn how to deploy it and how to use it and stuff like that. Architecturally, it's written as a bunch of independent Django applications, so you can integrate it into a bigger Django project if you want. All you really need to do is provide all the templates that it expects. The functionality it gives you, it comes with basic CFP support that you need to extend to a certain amount, and then tools for turning those proposals into published presentations that appear on a schedule. It also supports a basic degree of sponsor management and some very basic volunteer management. You may or may not want to use either of those features. It also originated a Markdown-based CMS, which these days is called Pinax Pages, and a CMS for publishing content boxes that appear on multiple pages, which is called Pinax Boxes. These aren't distributed with Symposium these days, but they are included with the LinuxConf demo site, which you can find at that thing, which is a fully complete Django project that shows you how to integrate Symposium into a Django project, including a Bootstrap-based theme, which you can extend yourself in order to theme the Symposium-related bits of stuff. In terms of making a talk proposal, basically all you need to do is subclass Symposium's proposal-based stuff, adding extra fields that you might want to do. This is all Django models, so if you're familiar with how to write stuff in Django, it's pretty easy to wrap your head around how to extend a CFP to ask for the stuff that you want to ask for. The other thing you need to do is create a form that asks, or that creates a proposal for you. There's a bit of configuration voodoo that I'm leaving as an exercise for you to go and research. But once you do that, your speakers can go in and create their profile and submit talks. Reasons why you might want to do this, use software like this over Google Forms from a speaker's point of view, is that things that are repetitive in things that aren't designed for CFPs aren't repetitive in software that's actually designed for it. So for example, filling in your speaker details is not repetitive in Symposium because you go in and create a profile as a speaker and then submit multiple talks underneath that profile. So it's actually shared, but that particular detail is shared between all the proposals that each individual speaker creates. And you can also go and handle cases where there are multiple presenters. And you can have an unlimited number of multiple presenters. It's sort of an advantage of having a database relationship as opposed to putting stuff in a spreadsheet, is that you can actually have relationships between things as opposed to having multiple speakers in a spreadsheet would be an interesting issue because everything is repeated. It also features an interface for reviewing stuff. So people can go in and vote on things and write comments and keep a score on things. Because everything's written with Django models, it's easy enough to do interesting queries either in your database itself with SQL or from the Django shell itself, so using the ORM interface to the Django models. And staff can go in and accept things, and this gives you the ability to automatically mail out acceptance and rejection emails to presenters from within that, so you don't need to manually go and collect email addresses and do mail merges yourself or whatever. And finally, once you've marked a talk proposal as accepted, it more or less automatically appears in a schedule that is more or less automatically generated by Symposium for you. So you don't need to go in and manually copy stuff into schedule pages and stuff like that, which is terribly convenient. So Symposium, as I mentioned before, it's written in Django. So if you're familiar with Django, it's easy enough to pick up. Everything in terms of the user interface is written in terms of Django templates. So you can grab that default project, the LinuxConf one, take their templates, modify them, fit them into your base theme. There is a complete one provided by that project as well. So if you want to start from making a conference website, it's easy enough to modify that one yourself if you wanted to. For some historical reason, though, Symposium doesn't do ticketing. And so historically, conferences that have used Symposium for doing the CFP and other conference-related stuff have needed to find a separate ticketing product for them to use to register their attendees. Eventbrite is really, really common in the Django world. But Pikeon US, who originally commissioned Symposium, use a registration package that their event production company uses, or that's provided to them, which has basically left all these community conferences that want to run their own registration without an option for running their own registration stuff. So this year, with the help of the Python Software Foundation, I've been working on a package called Registration, which is a ticketing package that's built on top of Symposium. Currently, it's designed to be used entirely with Symposium, but with a relatively small amount of work, you could probably decouple it from it and just use it entirely on its own. At the moment, it has support for 2 different payment options. It supports automatic credit card processing using Stripe, or you can enter in bank transfers and checks or, manually if you want to do that and receive payments by mail. Maybe not. So this is a sample invoice from the development site for LinuxConf EU 2017, and it shows a bunch of stuff that you can do with it, which I'm going to walk you through momentarily. But there are tickets in it, there are early bird discounts, there are dinner tickets, and a t-shirt. The first t-shirt is free, but the second one is not, and there's also a free dinner, and there's also a free breakfast ticket. I'm going to talk you through how all these things work in terms of structuring up a ticket for a conference with it. So in terms of complementary products, these are actually implemented as things that have a fee, because you might conceivably want to buy more than one of them, e.g. A dinner ticket for you and then a dinner ticket for your partner. But the discount only gets applied to the first. And the reason why we have this sort of model is that it means that all the dinner tickets in the system are inventoried together in the thing. So you can say, here's all the dinner tickets that we've sold. Things like Eventbrite give you, here's all the tickets that you've sold, and then here are all the extra dinner tickets that have been bought alongside it, which is not quite as intuitive a way to think about selling things. And so under the hood, there's a discounting engine. And in this case, basically you can say that if you've bought a specific sort of ticket, then you get a 100% discount off a dinner ticket and a 100% discount off a t-shirt. It's worth noting, by the way, that everything in registration in terms of configuring your inventory and configuring your discounts and stuff like that is done through the Django admin. It's a thing that you get for free, basically. Early bird discounts are implemented slightly differently. In this one, you can basically say that there's a date range or a stock range, and that gives you a discount of $150 off this sort of ticket or something like that. The other thing you can do is offer free tickets to speakers, for example. Registration has a feature called flags, which enables different products when certain conditions are met. And so this one switches on the speaker ticket if you are a presenter with an accepted sort of talk. So either a talk, a tutorial, or a mini-conf. Registration also handles capacity management, so you can make sure that you don't sell too many tickets, or that you make sure that you can only sell a certain amount of tickets to the general public and other tickets to sponsors and speakers and stuff like that. It also has a reporting interface which lets you do Django ORM queries to generate reports. And although the payments are implemented using Stripe at the moment, it's entirely pluggable. So you could, with a couple of hours work, write your own payment gateway interface for it. So if you wanted to support PayPal or Braintree or something like that, you can integrate that with relatively minimal effort. So we're going to finish up by looking at what a Python-based tech stack looks like for an actual conference. So I'm going to use LinuxConf AUs as an example because I am spending far too much time in that project at the moment. So rather than using the Pinax Pages CMS that the demonstration project uses, the Symposium demonstration project uses, we're using Wagtail, which is a very, very, very nice CMS that's written upon Django. It has Django-like models for pages, so if you understand how to do stuff with Django, then it's easy enough to pick up Wagtail. And it's also really well fully functioned for end users. So it has a really nice rich text editor, and this content management stuff in it is actually good enough that you can give it to people who aren't familiar with the software itself and still get good results. So this is a semi-freeform rich text-based page, and you can add in images and stuff like that. But you can also create relatively complicated structures for pages, like our homepage, which has these various panels, each of which has a heading and an image and some links and perhaps a background image. And these can actually link into various other Django models. So in this case, we have pages that are in Symposium, so we can link back to Symposium pages or pages within Wagtail if we want to. Because everything's written in Django, you can talk between the two of them. Another nice thing that Wagtail gives us is a thing called Snippets, which allows us to define bits of text from within Wagtail and incorporate it into pages that aren't otherwise served up by Wagtail. So in this case, if we want to describe particular schedules, we can put some text in there, and then it appears up in the schedule pages, which is a really, really nice feature. It means that all the content management can be done within the content management system, even though they're not really content management system controlled pages. So LCA has a lot of CFPs, quite unusually so for tech conferences. We call for proposals ourselves. We end up asking for 3 different proposals as part of our main CFP, and then later on in the year, community organized tracks end up running their own CFPs. In previous years, when LCA was using Zookeeper, all these community organized tracks would run their own CFP with their own software, either using like Google Forms or something like that, or asking for emails and stuff like that. Symposium makes it really, really easy for us to run lots and lots of CFPs with different review groups and stuff like that. So we're actually doing that this year. There is a CFP run from within Symposium for every single one of those tracks, which is really quite nice. I'd like to talk more about the ticketing side of things. Unfortunately, we've only just merged the ticketing software, and we're launching ticket sales next week. So hopefully that goes well, I guess. So in conclusion, start with basic stuff. Use the minimum viable conference management software until you know why you don't need to. For some reason, conference software in Python is invariably written by Australians. I do not know why. And in general, knowing Python can help you do cool stuff with this sort of stuff. That is the end. I think there might be questions. Are there questions? Oh, please.